More than a few of the stories that we tell on Kentucky, Tennessee Living is of our own family history, and those that are not, we treat them as if they were. We try our best to be honest and truthful about what happened according to family lore, newspapers, and documentation as we can possibly be. And we treat all feuders and outlaw stories with the same love and respect as we try to give to our own family. We have consistently tried to give and show the utmost respect to all families involved in our feud series. This is way harder than anyone may think that it is, but having said that, we are going back to the Hatfield and McCoy feud by request of Carly Hatfield 365. We felt that the last time that we visited the feud, it would be an overview only, as we didn't want to stir up trouble with it. But boy howdy did that happen anyway. I mispronounced Anderson Ants Hatfield's name in the entire documentary. I'm extending my humble apologies to the Hatfield family for the error. I tried to correct this with the shorts, but it seems that whatever we do on the internet stays on the internet. And boy, did the internet interneted anyway. Come along with us as we explore the life of Valentine Hatfield. All aboard the Kentucky, Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up that time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine for our flight back in time, but it convinces the YouTube algorithm that we need a bigger vehicle to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Time unlocks history. As time marches on, more documentation about the life or situation of a person comes to light. We agree with Carly Hatfield 365 that the life of Valentine Hatfield needs to be revisited. Now, this is not going to be easy, and I'm sure one side or the other side will have feelings about it. However, and I say this multiple times, I did not write the documents and reports. I just happened to find them and bring them out into the sunlight. I cannot help what Grandma said. This is what was written at the time the events happened. We will have a future video about the full-page article found in the Sun newspaper, which was printed in New York. And we do mention this rendition in this video concerning the life of Valentine Hatfield, where the reports do differ from the story. While yellow journalism was a thing during this time period, we do feel that we need to mention the inconsistencies were present. With any of those who are deemed Appalachian outlaws, we do ask for everyone to please remember that they belonged with someone's family, that they were loved, valued, and honored. Now, the history of Valentine Hatfield. Family life of Valentine Hatfield. According to the Find a Grave website, Valentine Hatfield was born sometime in 1834 in Logan County, West Virginia. There is no actual month or day given for his birth, only the year. His parents were Ephraim Prater, Big Eve, Hatfield II, and Nancy A. Vance Hatfield. Valentine's siblings were Martha Matilda Hatfield Varney, 1831 to 1910, Elizabeth Hatfield Record, 1835 to 1917, William Anderson Devil Ants Hatfield, 1839 to 1921, Ellison Hatfield, 1841 to 1882, Elias Goodlias Hatfield, 1846 to 1908, Emma Hatfield Smith, 1849 to 1929, Bridget Biddy Hatfield Mitchell, 1850-1924, Smith Hatfield, 1853 to 1937, Patterson Hatfield, 1853 to 1902. Valentine married Jane Maynard Hatfield, August 29, 1853, in Pikeville, Kentucky. Side note, I have the marital source in the description box. I have found lots of dates for the Hatfields and McCoys listed there. According to the Find a Grave website, Jane was born in 1835 and died in 1903. They had children together, and they are as follows. Ephraim Davis Eve Hatfield, 1856 to 1945. Nancy Hatfield Steele, 1857 to 1957. Vicey Hatfield Mahon, 1861 to 1948. Rebecca Hatfield Mounts, 1864 to 1960. Sampson Sampy Hatfield, 1867 to 1955. Ellison Hatfield, 1870 to 1947. Octavia Hatfield Mounts, 1871 to 1955. Laura Hatfield Kennedy, 1872 to 1962. Allen Hatfield, 1877 to 1975. Columbia Hatfield Mounts Daniel Stewart Rutherford, 1878 to 1965. We will only cover the parts of the feud where Valentine Hatfield had an active role in the events that happened in this video. We do have an overview of the feud if you wish to brush up on other events. Business partner and justice of the peace. This is what is widely known about Valentine Wall Hatfield. First, it was well known that he was in the timber business with his brother, Anderson Ance Hatfield. It is mainly regarded that Wall was more of a silent partner without getting into the day-to-day running of the business. It is unclear if Wall had much to do with the conflict that the business had over timberland and sales. The McCoys also ran a timber company, but they were not as successful as the Hatfields. There were several McCoys who were hired by the Hatfields, and it does not seem that there was any conflict about the employment. Historically, Valentine left the patriarch position of the family to Anderson when it came to dealing with the extended family. All disputes between the families historically was between Ance and Randolph McCoy. But this does not mean that Valentine kept himself completely out of the feud. While his part is mainly nonviolent, he did start trouble through his legal decisions as Justice of the Peace. Hatfield made legal decisions that fed the feud on the West Virginia side by ignoring the law on the Kentucky side, including and regarding extradition and the issuance of warrants. Justice of the Peace clarification. In our overview of the Hatfield and McCoy feud, we said that there was a Justice of the Peace who had heard the case of the hog. Evidently, there were several Justices of the Peace in the area. Valentine Hatfield, Matthew Hatfield, and Anderson Preacher Ance Hatfield were named as possible Justice of the Peace in this case. This is very important because there are sources that simply list the person over this case as Justice Hatfield. From the majority of the sources that we could find, Valentine Wall Hatfield had nothing to do with the hog case. However, since he is named in some cases, for clarification, we will briefly go over the case. Floyd Hatfield, the cousin to Ance, had a hog. Randolph McCoy claimed the hog was his. There were notches in the pig's ear, which gave credence that this was a McCoy hog and not a Hatfield one. The matter was taken to a local Justice of the Peace. The community that the trial took place in had a very heavy McCoy influence. However, a Hatfield presided. Testimony was given by Bill Stanton, who was related to both families and was a member of the McCoy extended family by blood, but had married into the Hatfield clan. Stanton had testified in Floyd Hatfield's favor. Justice Hatfield took his testimony into account and ruled for the Hatfields. He then removed the theft charge against Floyd Hatfield and allowed him to retain possession of the hog. We took this opportunity to look at all three men who were possible Justice of the Peace in this case. We are in no way saying that this event did not take place. We are currently in the understanding that it did to explain the death of Bill Stanton. However, there might be enough evidence that another unnamed Hatfield served in this manner and held the court case before them. First, we looked up Preacher Ance because his name is so closely associated with Devil Ance. It seems that Reverend or Preacher Anderson Hatfield was the son of Andrew Hatfield and Susanna Susan Trent Hatfield. Preacher Ance would have been a cousin to Devil Ance. But this is not all that we have found. It seems, according to the article, The Hatfields of Blackberry Creek, written by Thomas Dodson, source in the description box. Preacher Ants was not a justice of the peace during the hog trial. To quote his article, quote, at the time of the purported pig trial, which never happened, Preacher Ants did not live in the house where the market now stands. The preacher was living at Blue Spring in 1878 and was not the justice of the peace at the time, unquote. Okay, so Dawson does not believe that the pig trial took place at all. But it is interesting that the author does say that Preacher Ants was not even in the area at that time. But let's go back to another source that states that Matthew Hatfield was justice of the peace of the case. Matthew Ellison, Matt Hatfield, was a Pike County constable during the Hatfield and McCoy feud. He was the son of Ephraim Hatfield and Phoebe Easter Vance Hatfield. If this is the correct Matt Hatfield, then he could not have been justice of the peace that is spoken about in the trial either. Being both a constable and a justice of the peace was simply not done. So, what about the sources that state that Valentine Wall Hatfield heard this trial? It seems that there is no substantial evidence for this either. Currently, we could not find the date that Hatfield became a justice of the peace. So, for now, we have to discount him as a potential justice in this matter. Again, we are not discounting that the pig trial took place. We firmly believe that there is a huge grain of truth to it. After all, supposedly, Bill Stanton lost his life over the testimony he gave on who owned the said pig. We are only putting forth the research that we have found to let you make up your own mind about the matter. All we can say is, if neither of the men listed heard the trial, who did? It is now a question we leave to further evidence coming to light as time marches on. The Valentine Hatfield confusion. Like the name Anderson Hatfield, there were several men named Valentine Hatfield. As one example, there was a Valentine Hatfield that would show up after Wall's death in the newspapers. Between 1915 and 1918, a Valentine Hatfield was accused of stealing an election. He was accused of taking votes out of a ballot box. This case went to trial, and Hatfield was acquitted of all the charges. We have found the name of Valentine Hatfield related to other cases in West Virginia, but none of the dates line up with the life of the Valentine Hatfield we are covering. We can confirm that this was very true in the family, as the website's Ancestors Family Search had an article named Justice Valentine David Hatfield, with a newspaper report inside of it. Unfortunately, we do not know the source of this newspaper article, but we find it very interesting. Quote, Valentine Ephraim Traditional Names. Logan, July 23rd. How the given names of Ephraim and Valentine have both been used in one branch of the Hatfield family for 6 generations was brought out in discussions following the annual Hatfield family picnic on Main Island Creek Sunday. The first Hatfield to settle in Kentucky 150 years ago was named Ephraim. He had a son named Valentine, whose nickname was Wall, and a curious coincidence is that all Valentine Hatfields since have been familiarly called Wall. Valentine Hatfield's son was named for his grandfather, Ephraim, and was known as Big Ephraim. Big Ephraim's son was christened Valentine and was one of the Hatfields active in the McCoy War. He was known widely as Uncle Wall. Uncle Wall's son, Eve Davis Hatfield, has named his own son Valentine, unquote. So, as you can see, if 6 generations all have an Ephraim and a Valentine in it, it would stand to reason that there would be confusion, especially if the Valentine named men had a nickname of Wall. The duties of a justice of the peace. One of the questions concerning Valentine Hatfield is, did he overstep his duties of his office? I have always thought of Hatfield as a local politician only. He had just enough power to warrant respect of his small community. It is unclear if Hatfield had bigger aspirations for his career. However, we did find what his duties were for the office that he held. According to the West Virginia Encyclopedia, the following is a list of duties for the office of Justice of the Peace. Quote, from the founding of the state until January 1st, 1977, Justices of the Peace functioned as the lowest rung of the West Virginia judiciary. The office had its origins in England and was transplanted to colonial Virginia in the 17th century. In West Virginia, JPs were given jurisdiction over misdemeanor offenses and small civil claims. The Justices of the Peace would also set initial bail in felony cases and conduct preliminary hearings. Justices of the Peace received no salaries, but were compensated by the cost assessed against the losing party in the civil cases and against criminal defendants who were convicted. Thus, it was long part of the legal folklore of West Virginia that JP stood for judgment for the plaintiff, that is, the person who brought the suit. If a defendant was acquitted in the criminal case, the justice was not compensated. Unquote. Abuse of power is nothing new. Even to this day, there are many complicated cases like this. But one has to wonder how corrupt Hatfield really was. Was he a boss hog from the Dukes of Hazzard kind of character? Or was Hatfield more of a man trying to protect his family kind of character? We tend to lean that he is more like the latter. Our reasoning being that Hatfield had left the major decisions concerning the clan to his brother Ance. The decisions about bootlegging. One of the accusations leveled against Valentine Hatfield is that of ignoring warrants, extraditions, and indictments made in Kentucky against the Hatfields. What warrants and indictments? And exactly who were they against? And why would these and other legal decisions feed the feud between the two families? We might have found the answer to this. Simply put, moonshine. There is a wonderful quote in the movie Coal Miner's Daughter given by Lee Dollahide. Quote, if you're born in Kentucky, you've got three choices, coal mine, moonshine, or move it on down the line. Unquote. This quote can also be given to just about anywhere in the Appalachian Mountains. But in the case of the Hatfields in 1880, there were no major coal mines in the area yet. So the choices here would have been timber, moonshine, or down the line. Let's talk about moonshine for a moment. Almost everyone knows that it is illegal whiskey that is made in the mountains and goes by several different names. Usually it is distributed at night and sometimes taken across state lines. The charge for this is called bootlegging. As such was the case with Johnson Hatfield, who would transport the moonshine from West Virginia into Kentucky. Now, other than this being illegal, why would this cause trouble between the two families? Simply put, both families were competing for the same market. This would involve the manufacturing, distribution, and sale of the moonshine. It is thought that since they were competitors, that this also contributed to the anger in both families against the other. We see this go on today with gangs or mob families. When Johnson was 18 years old, he stayed into trouble, with a newspaper report saying that he had been indicted 27 times for transporting moonshine whiskey for sale. Pike County, Kentucky Sheriff Joe Radcliffe deputized Talbot McCoy to help bring Johnson Hatfield in. The McCoy family had Johnson arrested or kidnapped on an outstanding Kentucky bootlegging charge against him. This was thwarted by Rosanna McCoy. But it goes to show that Johnson Hatfield never faced trial or jail time for his illegal actions. So why wouldn't he face these charges? Simply put, when the charges came across the desk of Valentine Hatfield, he would either simply ignore them, or make the decision that there was either not enough evidence for the charge or some other legal decision to keep Johnson from being extradited across the state line into the state of Kentucky. These decisions would make the McCoy family mad, as they would see this as no justice for their family, as Johnson was taking their business away from them. While we have no conclusive direct evidence for this, we have simply put together the clues for this conclusion. It would explain why Valentine was accused of not doing his duties when it came to the warrants, extraditions, and indictments. as well as it would explain why Johnson Hatfield was able to break the law 27 times for bootlegging and never spend a day in jail for the crimes. What do you think? Do you think, like we do, that Valentine Hatfield could have helped his nephew Johnson in this manner? Do you think that this could have been the reason why Valentine Hatfield has the charge of ignoring Kentucky state law brought against his reputation? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. The interview with Valentine Hatfield. Quote, Old Man Hatfield, along with 8 others taken to Louisville. History of the famous feud from their side. Louisville, Kentucky, February 17th. The 9 West Virginians known as the Hatfields arrived here last night in charge of Deputy United States Marshal and the jailer of Pike County. They will appear before Judge Barr of the United States District Court Monday, when the habeas corpus application of the governor of West Virginia will be further heard. Valentine Hatfield, the old man of the gang, after stating that they had been well treated while in the Pike County Jail, gave the following account of the celebrated feud. Quote, The whole trouble, so far as I know, began about 6 or 8 years ago. I had 5 brothers, Ellison, Elias, Anderson, Smith, and Patterson. Ellison was the first one killed. 3 of the McCoy boys shot and cut him on Blackberry Creek on the Kentucky side, and he died the next day. The trouble, I believe, was started by one of the McCoys attempting to arrest Anderson Hatfield's son Johnson about 8 years ago. There was a row, but I don't remember exactly what it was. After Ellison Hatfield was killed, Talbert, Richard, and Farmer McCoy, all young men, were killed by a crowd supposed to have come from West Virginia. The killing was done on the bridge between Blackberry and Mates Creeks. The next Pike County grand jury indicted a lot of people in West Virginia. No one was arrested. However, after that, Jeff McCoy, who is Bill Daniels' brother-in-law, heard Daniels and Tom Wallace abusing the Hatfields, and a quarrel followed. McCoy attempted to arrest Wallace, and a fight took place. This resulted in Cap Hatfield arresting McCoy, and when McCoy tried to get away, he was killed by the men who were guarding him. It was said that Cap Hatfield and Tom Wallace killed him. Sometime after this squad of men went to Randolph McCoy's house and killed one of his sons and a daughter and beat up his old woman. This was charged to the Hatfields, but I never knew anything about it until some time after the murders were committed. A short time after this, a company Pike County men was formed to follow the Hatfields and kill them. They came into West Virginia and found Jim Vance and Captain Hatfield on a bridge near Thacker's Creek. They shot Vance to death and wounded Cap Hatfield. After that, the Kentuckians came in and captured us while we were at work on our farms. None of us resisted, and no injury was done us. But if there was any authority for confining us in jail, I never heard of it." Unquote. County Attorney J. Lee Ferguson of Pike was questioned concerning the claim of the prisoners that they were innocent. He laughed at the idea and said that while the worst of the Hatfield crowd had not been captured, the men who are now in the Louisville jail are undoubtedly a part of the gang. He declared that the prisoners had not been unlawfully imprisoned, but after having crossed the borderline between West Virginia and Kentucky, had been legally arrested and taken to jail by the proper officers. He did not deny that the West Virginians had been forcibly taken from their homes, but held that the Kentuckians were justified by the dangers threatening them in taking the matter into their own hands when the West Virginia authorities refused to assist in restraining and punishing the outlaws, who had only to cross a narrow stream to commit the most atrocious crimes and then cross back again to safety from the law. Mr. Ferguson asserted positively that he had credible information that a state official of West Virginia had been restrained with a fee of $500 to prevent Governor Wilson from recognizing the requisition issued by Governor Buckner. He charged also that the Hatfield crew had been brought other influences to bear, and that the worst of the gang were now in comparative security. Of the prisoners now in the Louisville jail, Mr. Ferguson said that Valentine Hatfield recently confessed to him that he had 5 living wives and 33 living children. 9 of his children have died. Mr. Ferguson states that Hatfield has a peculiar ideas of polygamy and does not marry his wife according to law, but takes them and appropriates his time out between them. Unquote. Quick overview of the McCoy-Hatfield romance. One of the linchpins of the feud has to be the romance that sparked between Rosanna McCoy and Johnson Hatfield. While they never married, Rosanna did run off to live with Johnson at the Hatfield home. When Johnson was 18 years old, he did get into trouble, with a newspaper report saying that he had been indicted 27 times for transporting moonshine whiskey for sale. Pike County, Kentucky Sheriff Joe Radcliffe deputized Talbot McCoy to bring in Johnson Hatfield. When Rosanna learned of this, whether by rumor at the McCoy home or by being caught in the bushes in Hatfield's arms, the story differs with the source material. Rosanna made a midnight ride to alert Aunts Hatfield, who organized a party of men to rescue Johnson from his captors as they were trying to transport him to Pikeville, Kentucky, to face the charges. At gunpoint, the Hatfield clan rescued Johnson and brought him back to West Virginia, where Kentucky had no legal authority or standing. But this will not be the end of this. We will go into more detail about the romance of Johnson and Rosanna and their part of the feud in Chapter 2 of the Hatfield and McCoy Feud, Myths and Legends series. The Fatal Election Day. On August 5, 1882, on Election Day in Kentucky, a deadly mix of contempt and alcohol came together. Before now, there had been raids, kidnappings, and lawsuits that caused the family to despise each other. However, this day, the violence had reached its tipping point. 3 McCoy brothers, Tolbert, Farmer, and Bud, got into a drunken argument and brawl with Ellison Hatfield and another brother. It is thought to be Elias Hatfield, but both were brothers of Anderson and Hatfield. We did find an article that called Ellison a deacon, but it did not list the church. It is believed that all of the men got into a heated argument, and Ellison was stabbed 26 times, some in the back, and was killed by a gunshot when he was lying on the ground. Some historians say that Ellison lived for a very short time after this incident. We tend to agree with the historians on this point, as it makes sense with the story going forward. The popular view of the argument is said to have been over the romance of Johnson and Rosanna. That Johnson eventually spurned Rosanna while she was pregnant and married her cousin, Nancy McCoy. That meant that the child of Rosanna and Johnson would have been born out of wedlock, and thus would have caused a huge scandal at that time. It is unknown who said what to whom to start the argument, but it had deadly consequences. The McCoy brothers were arrested by the Hatfield constables and were taken to Pikeville, Kentucky for trial. Aunts Hatfield arranged a large group of followers and forcibly took their McCoy prisoners before they reached Pikeville. Tolbert, Farmer, and Bud were taken by force to West Virginia and tied to pawpaw trees to await the fate of Ellison Hatfield. When Ellison passed away from his injuries, the 3 McCoy brothers remained tied to the pawpaw trees, then shot multiple times by a mob. It is said that the McCoy brothers were riddled with bullets. Now, again, we have a source material from the Sun newspaper that is inconsistent. There are sources close to the time of this event that claim that the McCoy brothers were tied together tightly, that they were then taken to the pawpaw trees across the Tug River later, when the death of Ellison was announced to the mob. The story now varies. Here is where the story goes off into different branches. We were able to find a copy of the complete feud in the newspaper publication called The Sun. This was published in New York City, New York in 1888. Yes, that is 6 years after the event of the Election Day murder of Ellison Hatfield. Before the Hatfield trials, there was not very much that was printed about the conflict between the two families. However, the story that is printed is to be taken with a huge grain of salt, as we have found inconsistencies with it that will be addressed when we read the paper itself in another video. Summing up the account given in The Sun printed on October 7, 1888, Valentine was one of the men that were there the day that the McCoy brothers died. Also, according to this account, Valentine gave the order to open fire twice, but did not shoot anyone. While the McCoy brothers died on the Kentucky side of Tug River, Wall remained on the West Virginia side. After the shooting was finished, Wall acted as justice of the peace, asking all the men to raise their hands and swear to never speak of what happened on that spot on the pain of death. We also have the testimony of Sarah McCoy when she testified about what happened with the death of her sons. Sarah McCoy, quote, "I am the mother of Farmer, Tolbert, and Randolph McCoy. They are dead. They were killed on the night of August 9th, 1882. I saw them on the morning before that at Floyd McCoy's while they were under arrest. I did not see Wall Hatfield there. He was not there. I next saw them on Mate Creek in Logan County, West Virginia, at a schoolhouse. Wall had a double-barrel shot lying across his lap. I was talking, praying, and crying for my boys. While over the mouth of Mate, I heard Wall say that Ellison Hatfield died, that he would shoot the boys as full of holes as the sifter bottom," unquote. So, even though Sarah was not present at the shooting of her sons, she did see them the day before at the home of Floyd McCoy. She went on to state that she saw Valentine Wall Hatfield when she was at Mate Creek, West Virginia. She went on to say that even though she had begged Valentine on behalf of her sons, that he did not listen to her as vengeance was on his mind. Could Valentine Hatfield actually be innocent? We could not find anywhere from any source materials that Valentine Hatfield shot anyone. Nor could we find anywhere other than the Sun newspaper article that Valentine Hatfield ordered the shots fired from across Tug River. So why would he be arrested for this crime? If we take Sarah McCoy at her word, Valentine Hatfield threatened to kill the three brothers. And let's say, just for the sake of argument, that he did so. This does not mean that he actually did anything about those threats. Yes, he was mad, hurt, and in grief over his brother Ellison Hatfield. Anyone would be. This is a time that a lot of threats do get tossed around when this happens. But the truth of the matter was that it is all that it could have been, just trash talk. Saying a thing and doing a thing are completely different from each other. However, if that event does happen, even though you did not participate in it, you still look mighty guilty. The only reason we can find that Valentine Hatfield could have been arrested would have been guilt by association. But even the Sun states that Hatfield was across Tug River at that time of the shooting. So technically, he was not actually present at the exact location of the crime. And there are other sources that state that it was Ants, not Wall, that gave the order to shoot. Now, we are not saying that he could not have been guilty of this crime. We were not sitting in the courtroom, and we did not hear all of the evidence that was given to the jury. And, unfortunately, unlike our other feuds, there were no articles that reported the testimonies given during the trial. While the Hatfield and McCoy court case did go to the Supreme Court of the United States, there was no ruling from that court upon guilt or innocence. But we do have the court case documents from the Mahon versus Polite case to see the rulings whether or not extradition to the state of Kentucky was even legal. So the mystery remains. Was Valentine Hatfield truly guilty of the crime for which he stood trial? Arrest and conviction. Depending upon the source used, a total of 8 to 9 men, including Wall Hatfield, were arrested and brought to Kentucky to face murder charges and for resisting arrest. These charges included the murders of Tobert Farmer and Bud McCoy and their sister Alifair McCoy. There would be controversy surrounding this case, and it went to the Supreme Court that year. In the case of Mahon versus Justice, 127 U.S. 700, 1888, the question of extradition and bounty hunters would end up changing federal law. The Hatfield and McCoy feud would be the only Appalachian feud to reach the Supreme Court for a decision. Even though Valentine Uncle Wall Hatfield was convicted for his involvement with the murders of the McCoy sons, he may not have been involved in the attack that sent him to prison for life. Other than family lore and testimony of Sarah McCoy, there is no evidence that Hatfield was or was not among the group of men accused and convicted of the murders. Even among the newspaper reports of the event, Wall did not shoot anyone. If Hatfield was present at the shooting at the pawpaw trees, many accounts place him across the river when the event took place. We can only surmise that he was convicted on the grounds that he ordered the firing of the shots, if the newspaper account and Sarah McCoy's testimony are true on that portion of the story. Wall Hatfield was also not listed among the men who were present at the burning of the McCoy cabin that killed Alifair. However, we have seen report after report state that he was convicted for her murder as well as the murders of her brothers. We can pretty well bet what happened there. Wall was convicted for the murders of the 3 McCoy brothers, but since the trials were all taking place at the same time, it is possible that the newspaper reporters did mix up his actual conviction with the others that were also being convicted in the trial. We do have the corrected version of the charges against Valentine Hatfield coming from the Virginia Free Press, dated November 13, 1889. Quote, the Kentucky Court of Appeals on Saturday affirmed the decisions of the Pike County Court in the Hatfield-McCoy cases. Valentine Hatfield, Plant Mahon, and Doc Mahon go to the penitentiary for life for the murder of Talbot McCoy, and Ellison Mounts will hang for the murder of the girl, Alifair McCoy, the sister of the murdered men. Unquote. Not all who were accused were arrested. It is interesting that Ance Hatfield was not among those who were arrested and tried. Neither Kentucky nor West Virginia sought for his arrest in any of the events that took place, even though his location was well known and a bounty of $500 was placed on his person at one point during the feud. Ance Hatfield was never charged with the murders of the 3 McCoy brothers or for the shooting of the 2 young McCoy children, or the beatings, kidnappings, or other things that were done. Even though he was also known to use the courts to his advantage when it came to matters between the 2 clans of the feud, when the main trial was over, Hatfield was not on the run after that point in history. Many have pointed out that it may have been Hatfield's political connections that kept him from being arrested. However, his brother Wall had similar connections and was thus arrested, tried, convicted, and sent to prison. Wall Hatfield dies in prison. The report of Wall Hatfield's death was announced in the Logan County Banner, dated March 13, 1890. Quote, the death of Valentine Hatfield. Valentine Hatfield died at the Kentucky Penitentiary on the 13th of February. He was serving a life sentence for complicity in the mob that killed the 3 McCoy boys for the murdering of his brother, Ellison Hatfield. With the exception of this trouble, Mr. Hatfield bore a good name and was for a long time a justice of this county. Unquote. Wall did petition his brothers to help him escape from the prison, but no help came. This was because of their fear of also being arrested and charged with the murders. Valentine Hatfield died of an unknown cause in his cell block on February 13, 1890, in Frankfort, Kentucky. Wall would claim to his death that he was innocent of the charges against him. He was buried in the Penitentiary Ground Cemetery in Frankfort. So, the question remains, was Valentine Hatfield guilty or innocent of the crime of conspiracy to murder the McCoy brothers? We leave the answer to you. We have always stated that our audience sits as the 13th juror on these matters, and it is ultimately up to you to decide if you would have convicted Valentine Wall Hatfield or if you would have acquitted him. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian feuds. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. Please be sure to double check that you are subscribed, as some of our viewers are finding that they are no longer subscribed to our channel. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.